She's become the first woman ever to lead a major U.S. party, but opinion polls suggest Hillary Clinton is still unpopular with many Americans. And with her rival Bernie Sanders still in the race, can she break the ultimate glass ceiling? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Folly Thibault. Former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton has claimed the nomination for the U.S. Democratic Party. She's in line to become the first woman ever to lead a major party's bid for the presidency. It's been a difficult journey so far. Clinton has often struggled to connect with voters. Her rival, Senator Bernie Sanders, has refused to bow out, telling supporters he will fight on until the Democratic Convention in July. And a potentially unpleasant and personal battle looms with Donald Trump. But Clinton says she's made history by even getting this far. We'll get to our guests in just a moment, but first, Deborah sets up our discussion.
Hillary Clinton was clear at her rally in New York. This was a breakthrough for equality.
Tonight's victory is not about one person. It belongs to generations of women and men who struggled and sacrificed and made this moment possible.
She also pledged to fight for the values of her opponent, Bernie Sanders. However, soon afterwards it was reported that her campaign has set up a Republicans Against Trump website. And that's exactly what Sanders supporters fear. Once Sanders drops out of the race, Clinton may forget her promises to the left and begin courting the right. Some 4,000 kilometers away at his rally in California, her opponent made clear he was not ready to give up the struggle.
We are going to fight hard to win the primary in Washington, D.C. And then we take our fight for social, economic, racial, and environmental justice to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania.
Hillary Clinton is now projected to have won a majority of the pledged delegates. Those are awarded directly as a result of the voters and are assumed to be locked in. But she still relies on the results of secret surveys of Democratic Party insiders known as superdelegates who've yet officially to choose their candidate. And that's why Sanders argues he still has a shot. Polls show Clinton to be terribly unpopular. His campaign's hope is her ratings plummet even further as Clinton faces growing scrutiny. However, for the first time, cracks are showing in the campaign of the presumptive Republican nominee, and an implosion within the Republican Party may make Clinton's unpopularity irrelevant. Trump was watching his words at his victory rally, even using a teleprompter. His careful attack on Clinton's trustworthiness was a signal to the wary Republican establishment. He also thinks it's Clinton's unfavorability that means he can win.
Hillary Clinton turned the State Department into a private hedge fund. The Russians, the Saudis, the Chinese all gave money to Bill and Hillary and got favorable treatment in return. It's a sad day in America when foreign governments with deep pockets have more influence in our own country than our great citizens.
Senior Republicans are standing with Trump, even as they admit his opinion that a judge born in Illinois but with Mexican heritage was racist. But a few less senior Republicans are calling for mutiny, concerned that any campaign discipline Trump now displays will be short-lived. Further sections of America will be alienated, and that both the White House and Congress will be lost. Shihab Ratansi, Al Jazeera.
Well, it's been a long road for Hillary Rodham Clinton, who, of course, began her public career as First Lady. She was elected to the U.S. Senate in 2000, where she worked with senators from both parties. In 2007, after years of speculation, she launched what became an unsuccessful bid for the Democratic nomination for president, but later took up the high-profile position of Secretary of State under President Obama. Clinton admits she's not a natural politician. She hasn't captured the public's imagination in the way Obama did, and she's struggled to articulate her message. But her supporters say she's worked hard to build relationships in the party and beyond, visiting 42 states since launching her presidential bid last year. Well, let's bring in our guest now for today's Inside Story. In New York, Jeanne Zaino, Professor of Political Science and International Studies at Iona College. In London, James Boyce, political historian and author of the book Hillary Rising. And in Washington, D.C., Deborah Tannen, Professor of Linguistics at Georgetown University and author of the article Our Impossible Expectations of Hillary Clinton and All Women in Authority. Welcome to you all. Thank you for being on Inside Story. Jeanne, in New York, if I can start with you. Hillary Clinton says she's taken an important step towards shattering the ultimate glass ceiling. Beyond the symbolism, just how big of a deal is this?
This is a very important moment, and I think the Clinton campaign rightly tried to capture that last night as she made the statement from right here in New York. She made a very moving speech last night, which was prefaced by a video highlighting the historic nature of this. This is a moment that's been a long time coming. Let's not forget the first woman, Victoria Woodhull, ran for president in 1874 and got exactly 0 electoral college votes. And so we're talking, you know, over 100 years, 125 years, and, you know, little less than 100 years since women got the vote in the United States. So this is a very important moment, and I think one of the big questions that many people are asking, in particular people who aren't incredibly fond of Hillary Clinton, is whether she is the right messenger for this. Right. And her unfavorabilities, as you mentioned, do raise questions about that. Right.
We'll get to that in just a moment, but I wonder, you say it's an important moment, but Jeanne, are Americans as excited about this as Hillary Clinton is? Will this, in your opinion, be a breakthrough for equality in America?
You know, I wouldn't say they're quite as excited as she is and her team are, but I do think Americans are welcoming of this. You know, it is obvious that it has been a long time coming, and if you look at the polls, many Americans feel like women have not been able to break, quote unquote, this glass ceiling, in part because they are judged in a harsher way than men are who run, and they hold themselves to higher standards, so we actually get fewer of them running. And so you look at our Senate, for instance, we still are vastly underrepresented in the Senate, still underrepresented in the House of Representatives, obviously at the presidential level, and we are starting to break through in the Supreme Court, but that's been a long time coming. So this is a struggle beyond the presidency in the United States, and I think most Americans recognize that, and they do welcome this. Is it going to be a huge change, a huge shift? You think back 8 years when people said Barack Obama's inauguration was going to create a post-racial America, and as we all know, that has not been the case. So I would hardly imagine that this is going to create a post-sexist America, if you will, regardless of what happens in November.
Very interesting to hear that. Deborah Tannen in Washington, D.C. Clinton, as Jeanne just said, has achieved something that no one else in the history of American politics has even come close to doing, and yet she's still very unpopular. I mean, most opinion polls say that she's as unpopular as Donald Trump. How do you explain this paradox?
Well, I want to point out that unfavorability can mean a lot of different things. So I think the basis for people saying the unpopularity of Hillary Clinton is, it's kind of thin. You hear things like, I don't know, I just don't like her. And I do explain that by the double bind. A double bind is far more pernicious than a double standard. A double standard means women are held to a different standard, but they can meet that standard. A double bind is a situation where you have 2 commands, you must follow them both, but anything you do to follow one violates the other. And that is the dilemma facing women in authority as well as Hillary Clinton. Anything that she does that would be leader-like makes her not a good woman. Anything she does that fits what we expect of women, being self-effacing, for example, smiling all the time, that makes her not a good leader. And so I think a lot of this, I just don't like her. I was really amused by one quote that I read where someone said, I haven't liked her since she first came on the scene in the 1990s. I don't know why, but when I find out why, I think it's going to be really bad.
So when people say that she's an inept and flawed candidate, what do they mean? Are they wrong when they say that?
Inept, I think, is not so wrong. It's kind of what she said herself, that she's not a natural politician, as her husband is, for example. Flawed, I don't think so. We have to realize that she has been out there in the public eye for over 35 years and has been the victim of endless attacks. And so a lot of this, I just don't trust her. comes from accusations that later were proven to be totally without basis. For example, Whitewater, Benghazi, and now this email thing. So I think a lot of it comes from that. And when people put that level of distrust against the level of distrust for Trump, which is much, much deeper, I think, feeling that he is completely inappropriate to even be considered for a role like that, I think that some of that will fade.
Okay, let's bring in James now in London. James Boyce, I mean, this is obviously a major historical moment, but even the Clinton campaign, it seems, has generally struggled to articulate why exactly it matters that she become the first woman to lead a major party in the United States. In contrast to her campaign in 2008, she's now embracing the historic nature of this campaign. I mean, why the change in strategy here? What did she do differently this time around?
Well, the way you phrase your question is very much the approach I took to writing the book Hillary Rising, which is to try to look back through Hillary's life and think about lessons from that incredible journey, from being a Goldwater girl in the early 1960s to now being the presumptive Democratic Party nominee. It's an incredible journey. You know, I touch upon some of the similar themes that Deborah was rightly alluding to there. I didn't refer to the concept of a double bind, which I agree with, by the way, but I made this reference that there is certainly one rule for everybody else and seemingly another rule for Hillary Clinton. Whatever she does, however she appears, her critics are widely using that as evidence of her inappropriateness. So many times she will say and do things which, if, for example, were coming from the mouth or the action of a male candidate, would be applauded and seem to be quite appropriate. But for some reason, because it's Hillary Clinton, it seemed to be wrong and not the right thing to do. Much like her husband, when he first came on the national scene in 1992, Hillary Clinton has been at the vanguard of her generation, and people tend to forget this now because she has been so much of our lives since 1992, but people forget that she's a remarkably accomplished woman in her own right, far notwithstanding her relationship with her husband. She might not be a natural politician, but she's a remarkably gifted individual, and I think we're about to find many of those skills on display as she moves forward into the general election. Right.
Sanders supporters, James, have said that the election was rigged against their candidate from the get-go, from the beginning, because Clinton was, you know, the wife of an ex-president. She was pretty much endorsed by virtually every elected official in the Democratic Party, that she knew the inside game, basically, and that this was unprecedented for a non-incumbent candidate, that basically this election from the start was against Bernie Sanders.
Well, it's nonsense to suggest that the system was rigged in any way. Let's be honest about this. Hillary Clinton was expected to run for the presidency this year. A number of leading Democrats looked at the race and realized that Hillary was going to have all the money and all the limelight and stayed out of this race, just as it must be said many Democrats did back in '92 when they thought that George H.W. Bush was unassailable. Bernie Sanders put his hat in the ring pretty much as a stalking horse, has done remarkably well, but he has found himself in many ways in the same situation that Hillary Clinton found herself in 8 years ago. It must be remembered that at that time the Democratic establishment didn't want Hillary Clinton to be the nominee for a variety of reasons, and that the superdelegates, which we're hearing so much about this time round, were stacked very much against Hillary Clinton 8 years ago. That helped prevent her from being the candidate in 2008. So quite frankly, Bernie Sanders knew the rules getting in. He played the game, he's played it very well and has done very well, it must be said, spending a lot of other people's money in the process, and on occasion outspending Hillary Clinton, who was very carefully and cautiously saved a lot of her funds to enter and use in the general election against Donald Trump.
James, you're clearly a big Hillary fan. Let me bring in Jeanne now in New York. Jeanne, Bernie Sanders says he will go all the way to the convention in Philadelphia in July, that he's not going to give up. I mean, everyone's talking about disunity in the Republican Party right now, but it doesn't look very good on the Democratic side either. It's going to take a lot to unite this party. It's going to take a lot, isn't it, to get Bernie Sanders to fully support Hillary Clinton?
Yeah, I mean, I think we are in a very similar situation to what we were in 2008. I think we forget a little bit how fractured the party was when Hillary Clinton finally made her famous speech and got out of the race. You had Hillary Clinton supporters who said they would never, ever vote for Barack Obama. And you know what? When they looked at the other side, they slowly came around. And I think we're going to see the same thing with many of Bernie Sanders' supporters. I would just go back for 1 minute and play devil's advocate for a minute, because what I'm hearing seems to suggest that Hillary Clinton is not a flawed candidate, and I would just take exception to that for many of my Republican and independent friends who see that the email scandal is something of her own doing. She was Secretary of State. She set up a server in her house in the county in which I live. She did that on purpose. The idea that she did it for convenience sake is nonsense. She did it because she didn't want to be questioned or critiqued by Congress, which may be perfectly understandable, but it's not perfectly understandable when there's the thought or idea that you may run for president. So I think, you know, it's a little much to say this is somebody who has been victimized in a way because of her gender. Yes, I understand the double bind. That's very true of many female candidates. We do not serve female candidates well in this country, but Hillary Clinton has invited some of this on herself, and I think she has to own that. And, you know, quite frankly, the Democratic Party has made it very, very clear that she is the favored candidate, and Bernie Sanders is right. You look at that debate schedule that they had this year and tell me that wasn't set up perfectly for Hillary Clinton. That may be something that they support and want to do, but they also have to understand that there are repercussions for that. I will tell you, my students, for instance, most young people in this country are not Hillary Clinton supporters. They are Bernie Sanders supporters. So yes, I do think they will come around when they look at their other options, but I would just take a step back and say Bernie Sanders has a lot to offer. I give Hillary Clinton credit for embracing many of his ideas, but she is not an unflawed candidate, if you will.
Let's hear from Deborah Tannen in Washington, D.C. Deborah, Jeanne said that Hillary Clinton has invited some of the criticism to herself, and she talked about young people in America today who fully support Bernie Sanders. What about your students? I mean, do they hate Hillary Clinton so much that they would vote for Donald Trump if, you know, it was just the two of them come November?
I agree that we can't we can't assume that what people say now is what they're going to do later. Absolutely. Words are very important. I'm sympathetic to the comment, let's not see her as a victim. Also very sympathetic to the question, let's not use the word rigged. That is an incendiary word as well. I guess my take on the email issue is a little bit different. It was not a secret. Everybody at State knew it. If it was Colin Powell, apparently did something similar. So there was plenty of time at the time for people to warn her if they felt that it wasn't right. But I understand people thinking that they feel it was perhaps not the best judgment to do that. But I think flawed may be simply, I believe, too strong a word. There has just been so much, kind of what we just heard, whatever she did, she got attacked for. And I can kind of understand her thinking, well, I might as well do something that I'm going to get attacked because I'm going to get attacked anyway. I don't know that she really thought that, but she has such a strong record of the accomplishments that she made when she was Secretary of State. And really important, you hear so many people in the Senate, including Republicans in the Senate, talking about the spectacular job that she did as senator, how they all expected that she was coming in as a prima donna. She was not going to really work. And they discovered that she was always courteous to everybody, was extremely successful working across the aisle with Republicans, and accomplished so much. So I think a lot of that is going to start coming out and will override the other.
But there is also going to be more scrutiny now, James Boyes. I mean, we mentioned the email scandal, of course. I mean, there's going to be a lot of focus on her. Do you see this ultimately hurting her, the email scandal and the other investigations that are ongoing?
Well, let's be honest about this. Both Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton have lived their adult life under scrutiny, going right back to when they were running Arkansas, for example. That obviously took a whole new leap when they came to the White House. But ever since 1992, Hillary Clinton has lived her life in scrutiny. One of the interesting things which I discovered writing the book was the fact that her closest friend, Diane Blair, said basically, you know, this is an intensely private woman and she is forced to live a very public life. That's a very, very difficult dichotomy to lead. And so many of the issues which have come up as challenges for Hillary Clinton, I mean, you suggested I'm a fan of Hillary Clinton's. I'm the first to admit she has flaws, foibles, as we all do. One of the challenges she faces is that she wants to maintain what she referred to in 1993 as a zone of privacy. What she considers private, her critics call a penchant for secrecy. And we see that actually coming through in a number of the issues which people want to focus upon, whether it's issues to do with an email, whether it's to do with defending her right to privacy and the files over the Whitewater situation so many years ago. As I think Deborah mentioned, you know, so many of these scandals have been investigated ad nauseum, and time again we find out that actually there was a conspiracy against the Clintons, the Arkansas Project as it was referred to, which came out to basically try and destroy Bill Clinton's credibility. That continues now with regard to Hillary. She's not an ideal, perfect candidate, but she's certainly the most qualified candidate for president this time round.
Let's speak about the issues. You mentioned some of the issues there. Bernie Sanders supporters are concerned that once he drops out, that Clinton will basically forget her promises to the left and move more to the right and focus more on you know, the middle America and so on. How does she address this?
Well, I have to be honest about it. Any student of American politics will tell you that Democratic candidates, when they're running for the nomination, tank to the left to their base. Republicans tank to the right to their base. And if you want to win the presidency, both sides have to come to the all-important center ground. So anybody who's trying to suggest that Hillary Clinton is going to be selling out the left to win the middle ground is talking nonsense, because if a candidate wants to win, they have to bring their support with them from their wing of the party and get the center ground of American politics. It's no good trying to campaign on either the left or the right, depending upon your party of affiliation, unless you just want to have an ideologically driven losing campaign. If you want to win the presidency, you take your base, you take it to the center, and you win the all-important center ground.
Okay, Jeanne, in New York, opinion polls again have shown that Bernie Sanders is way ahead of Donald Trump when Hillary Clinton is tied with Donald Trump. How do you see this campaign now moving forward? I mean, this is clearly something that the superdelegates have to consider, right? The fact that Bernie Sanders is more popular than Donald Trump right now.
Yeah, I would take exception to that idea, because you are always more popular than somebody when you are not being hit by a barrage of negative criticism. So I think if Bernie Sanders, and he's not going to, but if he was to become the nominee, he would get hit as hard by the Republicans as Hillary Clinton has, and his poll numbers would go way, way down very quickly. So I think Bernie Sanders is enjoying something of this false kind of honeymoon, because he's been able to stay a little bit in the background and above the fray. And so I think the Clinton team is right about that. The head-to-head race now is a little bit early. You've got to look at the presumptive nominees in a head-to-head.
Sure.
And if he was the nominee, he certainly probably wouldn't be ahead of Donald Trump at this point. He might be a little bit ahead, but not as far ahead as he is right now. He has benefited enormously from an absence of negative criticism. In fact, Donald Trump has been encouraging him to run as an independent, has been welcoming him to the race, because, of course, he is taking many of his lines and using them against Hillary Clinton. And I think most Democrats, even Bernie Sanders supporters, can recognize that.
All right, Deborah Tannen in Washington, you have the last word. 44 presidents have been elected in the U.S. over the last 228 years or so, all of them men. Do you think it's going to be different this year? Are we going to see history?
We are very optimistic that we will see the first woman president. Very exciting on the heels of our first African-American president. A lot of people feel it's time. And I think we're very fortunate that the woman that we have who was running is so supremely qualified. In the words of the New York Times, one of the most qualified candidates in recent history.
Okay, thank you very much all for an interesting discussion. It was obviously very good to hear your thoughts on this, and we will of course be talking more about the US elections in the coming weeks and coming months here on Al Jazeera. Jeanne, Zaino, James Boyes and Deborah Tannen, thank you all for being on Inside Story. And thank you as well for watching. You can always watch the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, you can go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Folly Thibault, and the whole team, thanks for watching. Bye for now.